Months turned into years, and the ripple effects of that fateful day continued to shape the lives of everyone involved. Evelyn's transformation was slow but steady, marked by moments of growth and reflection. Her work at the nonprofit became her new purpose, and she poured her energy into educating teachers about bias, privilege, and creating inclusive classrooms. She traveled to schools across the region, sharing her story, not to gain sympathy, but to warn others against repeating her mistakes. At first, some educators were resistant, dismissing her as someone who had gone too far. But over time, her honesty won them over. They saw her not as a villain, but as proof that even deeply flawed people can change, if they're willing to do the hard work. Evelyn also reconnected with Daniel and his family. Though it wasn't easy, their relationship remained fragile, built on cautious steps rather than instant reconciliation. Maya, now in college, occasionally joined Evelyn for community events, standing beside her aunt as they spoke about the importance of accountability and healing. For Evelyn, these small gestures meant everything. They were reminders that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with patience and effort. Marcus, meanwhile, thrived in ways no one could have predicted. After graduating high school, he earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, where he studied sociology and political science. His passion for advocacy only grew stronger, and he quickly became a leader among his peers. He organized rallies, wrote op-eds, and even interned with organizations focused on educational reform. Yet despite his success, Marcus never forgot where he came from or the challenges that had shaped him. He often returned to his hometown to mentor younger students, encouraging them to use their voices and fight for justice. One summer, during a homecoming visit, Marcus stopped by the old high school. The building looked much the same, but inside, things had changed dramatically. New murals celebrating diversity adorned the walls, and posters promoting inclusivity hung in every hallway. In the main office, a plaque honored Marcus and other students who had pushed for systemic change after the incident with Evelyn. Seeing his name there brought a mix of pride and bittersweet nostalgia. As fate would have it, Evelyn happened to be visiting the school that same day, attending a training session for incoming teachers. When their paths crossed in the hallway, both froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. Then Marcus broke the silence with a simple, "Hey." Evelyn smiled nervously, replying, "Hi, Marcus." There was no grand reunion, no dramatic embrace, just two people acknowledging how far they'd come since that painful chapter in their lives. They ended up chatting briefly, catching up on each other's journeys. Evelyn expressed how proud she was of Marcus's accomplishments, while Marcus admitted he respected the work she was doing now. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was understanding. And sometimes, that's enough. As they parted ways, Marcus felt a quiet sense of closure. Evelyn, too, walked away feeling lighter, knowing she had played a role in helping create a brighter future. Back at the nonprofit, Evelyn received an email from a former student, one who had once sat silently in her class, afraid to speak up. The message read, "Thank you for showing me that people can grow. You've inspired me to be better." Evelyn stared at the screen, tears welling up in her eyes. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of redemption can leave lasting impressions. In the end, the story of Evelyn and Marcus wasn't just about one moment of conflict. It was about resilience, accountability, and the power of second chances. Their paths may have diverged, but their shared commitment to change united them in spirit. Together, along with countless others, they proved that progress is possible, even in the face of pain. And as the next generation of students walked through the doors of the high school, ready to write their own stories, they carried with them the lessons learned from those who had come before. The days following the school board hearing felt like an eternity for Evelyn. She waited anxiously for the decision that would determine her fate, but even more so, she wrestled with the emotional aftermath of standing in front of the community she had let down. The hearing had been a turning point, not just for her career, but for her understanding of herself. For the first time, she truly grasped the weight of her actions and how deeply they had impacted others. It wasn't enough to simply apologize. Real change required action. When the verdict finally came, it was both expected and devastating. Evelyn would not return to teaching at the high school. While the board acknowledged her willingness to take responsibility, they deemed her presence too divisive for the student body. Instead, she was offered the option to resign quietly or face termination. Evelyn chose resignation, knowing it was the right decision, even if it stung. Teaching had been her life's work, and now it was gone. But Evelyn didn't wallow in self-pity. Determined to make amends, she began volunteering at a local nonprofit organization focused on racial equity and education reform. At first, stepping into this new role was intimidating. She attended workshops, listened to stories from marginalized communities, and worked alongside activists who initially viewed her with skepticism. Slowly, however, she earned their trust through consistent effort and genuine humility. Her colleagues noticed her dedication and encouraged her to share her journey as a cautionary tale, a way to help other educators recognize and address their own biases. For Marcus, life moved forward with its own challenges and victories. He graduated at the top of his class, delivering a powerful valedictorian speech that left many in tears. Standing on stage, he spoke candidly about resilience, accountability, and the importance of speaking up when things aren't right. "Change doesn't happen because we stay silent," he said, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "It happens because people are brave enough to demand better, for themselves and for others." The crowd erupted into applause, and for a moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel proud of everything he'd overcome. Despite the progress he made, Marcus still grappled with mixed feelings toward Evelyn. On one hand, he recognized her attempts to grow and improve. On the other, forgiveness didn't come easily. It wasn't meant to. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, and Marcus knew he owed it to himself to set boundaries. Still, he appreciated that Evelyn hadn't disappeared from the conversation. Her continued involvement in advocacy work showed him that she was serious about changing, not just for show, but because she believed it mattered. The school itself underwent significant changes in response to the incident. New policies were implemented to ensure students felt safe reporting incidents of discrimination or mistreatment. Teachers participated in ongoing diversity training sessions, and a student-led committee was formed to give young voices a platform in shaping school culture. These efforts weren't perfect, but they marked a step in the right direction, a sign that the community refused to let fear or discomfort stand in the way of progress. As months passed, Evelyn and Marcus crossed paths again during a panel discussion hosted by the nonprofit, where Evelyn now volunteered. They exchanged brief, awkward smiles before taking their seats on opposite ends of the stage. When asked about forgiveness during the Q&A portion, Marcus surprised everyone, including himself, by saying, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to believe someone can change while still holding them accountable." Evelyn nodded quietly, visibly moved by his words. In that moment, something shifted between them, not quite reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of mutual respect. Both understood that healing wouldn't happen overnight, but they were committed to playing their parts in creating a better future. Evelyn continued her work with the nonprofit, finding purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes she'd made. Marcus, meanwhile, pursued higher education, determined to use his voice to advocate for justice and equality. Though their journeys remained separate, they shared a common goal: ensuring no one else would have to endure what Marcus went through or what Evelyn caused. Together, along with countless others, they became part of a larger movement, one driven by hope, courage, and the belief that change is always possible. The day of the school board hearing arrived, and the small meeting room was packed with people. Parents, students, teachers, and even local reporters filled every available seat, their faces a mix of curiosity, anger, and anticipation. The air buzzed with whispered conversations as everyone waited for the proceedings to begin. Evelyn sat at a table near the front, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. She wore a plain navy blue dress, hoping to appear respectful and sincere, but her nervous energy was impossible to hide. Every time someone glanced in her direction, she felt her stomach churn. Marcus arrived with his mother, who had been fiercely supportive throughout the ordeal. They took seats near the back of the room, where Marcus could observe without feeling too exposed. His heart raced as he scanned the crowd, recognizing familiar faces, friends, classmates, and even some teachers who had quietly encouraged him to keep speaking up. Jamal gave him a subtle thumbs up from across the aisle, which helped calm his nerves slightly. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the tension gripping his shoulders. He knew this hearing would be pivotal, not just for Evelyn, but for the entire school community. One by one, individuals were called to speak. Parents recounted stories of their children feeling unwelcome or targeted in Evelyn's class. Students described moments when they felt dismissed or belittled because of their race, gender, or background. Each testimony painted a clearer picture of a teacher whose biases had gone unchecked for far too long. Evelyn listened intently, her head bowed low as shame washed over her. She wanted to disappear, but she forced herself to stay present, knowing she deserved to hear every word. When it was finally Evelyn's turn to address the board, she stood slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. For a moment, she froze, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am," she said, her voice quivering but clear. "What I did was wrong. There's no excuse for it. I hurt Marcus, I hurt Maya, and I hurt so many others in ways I didn't fully understand until now." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on Marcus before shifting to the corner where Daniel sat with his family. "I failed you all, not just as a teacher, but as a person." She paused, wiping away tears that had begun streaming down her face. "For years, I told myself I wasn't prejudiced, that I treated everyone equally. But the truth is, I carried biases I refused to acknowledge. Those biases shaped my actions, and they caused real harm. I can't undo what I've done, but I promise to do better, to listen, to learn, and to hold myself accountable." As she spoke, the room remained eerily quiet. Some attendees nodded along, moved by her vulnerability, while others stared coldly, unconvinced by her words. Evelyn ended her statement by thanking those who had come forward, acknowledging their courage in holding her accountable. When she finished, she returned to her seat, exhausted but relieved to have gotten through it. After Evelyn's remarks, the floor opened for final comments. Marcus hesitated before raising his hand. When called upon, he walked slowly to the microphone, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. Standing there, he felt both vulnerable and empowered. "I don't think forgiveness is something you ask for," he began, his voice steady despite the knot in his throat. "It's something you earn. And while I appreciate Mrs. Harper's apology, I'm not ready to forgive yet. What I am ready to do is fight for change, for policies that protect students like me, for training that helps teachers grow, and for a school where everyone feels safe and valued." His words resonated deeply, earning murmurs of agreement from the audience. When Marcus stepped away from the mic, applause broke out, a mix of support for him and acknowledgement of the hard truths he'd spoken. As the hearing concluded, the school board announced they would deliberate privately before making a decision about Evelyn's future. The room emptied slowly, leaving Evelyn sitting alone at the table, her head in her hands. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: this was only the beginning of a long journey toward redemption or ruin. The days following the incident felt like a blur for Evelyn. Sleep eluded her, and when it did come, it was plagued with restless dreams of Marcus's hurt expression and Maya's tear-streaked face. She replayed Daniel's words over and over in her mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. The weight of accountability pressed down on her chest, heavier than anything she'd ever experienced. For the first time in years, Evelyn couldn't bury her mistakes behind excuses or deflect responsibility onto others. This wasn't just about losing control in a moment of anger. It was about confronting who she truly was. At school, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Parents began flooding the administration with emails and phone calls, demanding answers and action. Some called for Evelyn's immediate dismissal, while others urged the school to address systemic issues that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Students organized meetings during lunch breaks, discussing ways to hold teachers accountable and create safer spaces within the school. Marcus became an unexpected figurehead for these efforts, his courage inspiring others to speak out. Principal Lewis wasted no time launching a formal investigation into Evelyn's conduct. Teachers were interviewed, students provided written statements, and security footage from the classroom hallway was reviewed. Evelyn cooperated reluctantly, answering questions with clipped responses and avoiding eye contact. She knew there was no escaping the consequences of her actions, but the thought of facing public judgment terrified her. Meanwhile, Evelyn attended mandatory diversity training sessions as part of the school's preliminary measures. At first, she approached them with resistance, convinced they were nothing more than performative exercises designed to humiliate her further. But as the weeks went by, something began to shift inside her. During one session, a facilitator shared personal stories of discrimination and resilience, recounting moments when seemingly small acts of prejudice had left lasting scars. Evelyn listened intently, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, but unable to ignore the parallels between those stories and her own recent behavior. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional discussion, Evelyn found herself lingering behind to speak with the facilitator. "I don't know if I can fix this," she admitted quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "How do you even begin to apologize for something like this?" The facilitator smiled gently, offering words of encouragement rather than judgment. "Apologies aren't enough on their own," she said. "What matters is what comes next. Are you willing to learn, to listen, to change?" Evelyn nodded slowly, though uncertainty still clouded her thoughts. She realized that making amends wouldn't be a quick or easy process. It would require consistent effort, vulnerability, and humility. And perhaps most daunting of all, it meant stepping outside her comfort zone to confront not only her biases, but also the harm they caused. For Marcus, the situation remained complicated. While he appreciated the support pouring in from classmates and community members, he struggled with feelings of mistrust toward authority figures like Evelyn. He wondered whether her apologies were genuine or merely attempts to salvage her reputation. Jamal encouraged him to stay focused on the bigger picture, using this moment to spark meaningful change within the school system. As the investigation progressed, Evelyn received a summons to appear before the school board at a public hearing scheduled for the following week. Panic set in as she imagined standing in front of a room full of angry parents, students, and colleagues, all waiting to pass judgment on her character. Yet amidst the fear, a flicker of determination emerged. If she wanted to reclaim any sense of integrity, if she hoped to repair the fractured relationships in her life, she would need to face the music head-on. In the days leading up to the hearing, Evelyn spent hours reflecting on her past actions and drafting a statement. It wasn't perfect, and she doubted it would erase the pain she'd caused, but it was honest. For the first time, she acknowledged her privilege, her biases, and the deep-seated prejudices she had ignored for far too long. As she rehearsed her words in front of the mirror, tears streamed down her face, not out of self-pity, but out of a growing understanding of the work ahead. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but Evelyn finally understood that silence and denial were no longer options. Whether or not forgiveness awaited her, she owed it to herself, and to everyone she'd hurt, to try. Evelyn stared at her phone, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the answer button. The day had already been unbearable, and she wasn't ready for another confrontation, or worse, a parent calling to demand answers. But something about this call felt different. It wasn't labeled as the school office or a generic number. Instead, it displayed a name she hadn't seen in years: Daniel Harbour, her brother. With a shaky breath, Evelyn pressed the green button and brought the phone to her ear. "Hello," she said cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end, heavy and loaded with unspoken tension. Then, finally, a man's voice broke through. "Evelyn," he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "We need to talk." Her heart sank. Daniel hadn't spoken to her in over a decade, ever since their falling out over issues neither of them had fully resolved. Hearing his voice now sent a jolt of unease through her body. "Daniel, what? Why are you calling me?" she stammered, gripping the edge of her desk. "I heard about what happened today," he replied, skipping pleasantries altogether. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. How could he possibly know already? News traveled fast, but not that fast. Before she could ask, he continued, "Do you have any idea how reckless and cruel you've been?" Evelyn opened her mouth to defend herself, but Daniel cut her off. "Let me tell you something, Evelyn. I'm married to a black woman. We have 2 kids together. Beautiful, smart, kind kids who deserve better than what you just did today." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "One of them goes to your school. My daughter Maya. She was sitting right there in your classroom when you lost control." The room seemed to spin around Evelyn as the weight of his words crashed down on her. Maya. Her niece was one of her students. She struggled to piece together the faces in her class, searching her memory for the girl she'd never connected to her own family. Sure, there was a quiet student named Maya who sat toward the back, but Evelyn had never paid much attention to her beyond occasional participation grades. The realization struck her like lightning. She had hurled hatred in front of her own flesh and blood without even realizing it. I didn't know," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes as shame flooded her chest. "Daniel, I swear, I didn't mean." "You didn't mean what? To hurt anyone? To embarrass Marcus in front of the whole class? To make my daughter feel like garbage because of who she is?" Daniel's voice rose, his patience wearing thin. "You can't hide behind excuses anymore, Evelyn. You can't pretend this is just some slip-up. This is who you are if you don't fix it." Evelyn collapsed into her chair, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to argue, to explain that she was under stress, that she wasn't a bad person, but the words caught in her throat. Deep down, she knew Daniel was right. She had let her biases take over, and now the people closest to her were paying the price. "Maya came home crying today," Daniel added, his tone softening slightly but still laced with pain. "She said she's scared to go back to your class. Do you understand what that means? You've made her feel unsafe in a place where she should feel protected." Evelyn closed her eyes, overwhelmed by guilt. She thought about Marcus, about Maya, about all the faces in her classroom that she'd failed to truly see. Her mind raced with questions. How could she undo the damage she'd caused? Could she even begin to apologize in a way that mattered? Before she could respond, Daniel spoke again, his voice firm and final. "I don't want to hear from you until you figure out how to make things right. And if you don't, then maybe it's time you step away from teaching altogether." The line went dead, leaving Evelyn staring at her phone in stunned silence. The walls of her carefully constructed world were crumbling, brick by brick. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not just for the mess she'd created, but for the relationships she'd neglected and the lives she'd impacted. Change wouldn't come easily, but one thing was certain. She couldn't keep running from the truth anymore. By the time the lunch bell rang, the school was buzzing with hushed conversations. News of what happened in Evelyn's classroom had spread like wildfire, igniting debates and dividing opinions among students. Some were outraged on Marcus's behalf, calling Evelyn's actions unacceptable and demanding justice. Others shrugged it off, saying things like, "It's just one word," or "She probably didn't mean anything by it." But no matter where they stood, everyone was talking about it. Marcus found himself at the center of the storm. As he sat down at his usual table in the cafeteria, his friends immediately surrounded him, their faces a mix of concern and anger. Jamal, his best friend since middle school, leaned in close. "Man, are you okay?" "Everyone's saying," she said. "Well, you know." Marcus nodded silently, picking at his food without much appetite. He wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet, but he appreciated that his friends were there for him. "You can't let her get away with this," another friend chimed in, her voice firm. "This is messed up. You should tell Principal Lewis. She needs to know what kind of teacher she has working here." Marcus hesitated, staring down at his tray. The thought of reporting Evelyn made his stomach churn. He hated confrontation, but deep down, he knew his friend was right. If he stayed silent, nothing would change. And if he didn't speak up, who would? Across the cafeteria, Evelyn sat alone in her usual spot near the faculty lounge. Normally, she'd be grading papers or chatting casually with other teachers, but today, she avoided eye contact with everyone. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket, but she ignored it, dreading what might be waiting for her. Angry emails from parents, messages from the administration, or worse, news outlets catching wind of the scandal. She felt trapped, as though the walls of the school were closing in around her. Meanwhile, the student body continued to react in waves. A group of seniors started drafting an online petition calling for Evelyn's removal, while others posted stories on social media sharing their own experiences with her. "She always picks on kids who don't look like her," one post read. "I'm not surprised this happened." Comments poured in, some supportive, others dismissive, creating a digital battleground. Back at Marcus's table, the conversation shifted toward action. "We need proof," Jamal said firmly. "If we're going to take this to the principal, we need witnesses." Who else was in the room? Marcus glanced around the cafeteria, spotting a few classmates who had been present during the incident. They seemed hesitant to get involved, glancing nervously at each other as whispers swirled around them. It was clear that fear of backlash, or perhaps even retaliation, was holding some people back. As the period ended and students began filing out of the cafeteria, Marcus resolved to do something. He couldn't let this moment pass without standing up for himself, and for others who might face similar treatment in the future. With Jamal's encouragement, he decided to write down exactly what happened, including names of witnesses and details of the event. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. While Marcus worked on gathering support, Evelyn retreated to her classroom, shutting the door behind her. She tried to focus on paperwork, but her mind kept drifting back to the morning's events. Guilt gnawed at her, making it impossible to concentrate. Just as she considered reaching out to the principal to explain herself, her phone buzzed again. This time, she couldn't ignore it. It was a call, not a text or email. Hesitant but curious, she picked it up, unsure of who could possibly be contacting her now. Little did she know, this call would shake her world in ways she never imagined. Whatever remnants of control she clung to were about to slip further away, pulling her into a whirlwind of consequences she hadn't anticipated. For Marcus, the fight for accountability was only beginning. And for Evelyn, the reckoning was closer than she realized. The classroom, once filled with the hum of discussion, now felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Marcus's unwavering stance had struck a nerve with Evelyn, and her frustration was reaching its boiling point. Her face flushed red as she gripped the edge of her desk, trying to maintain control. But Marcus wasn't backing down. He leaned forward slightly in his seat, his dark eyes locked onto hers, daring her to refute his arguments. "You think you know everything because you read a few books," Evelyn snapped, her voice rising above the usual calm tone she used in class. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't stop there. "Maybe if you spent less time arguing and more time listening, you'd understand how things really work." Marcus blinked, taken aback by her sudden hostility. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Evelyn let out an exasperated huff. Her composure cracked completely, And in that split second, something ugly slipped through. She muttered a word under her breath, low at first, almost like a whisper, but it was loud enough for Marcus and several nearby students to hear. It was a word loaded with history, pain, and hate, a word that silenced the entire room. For a moment, no one moved. The air seemed to freeze, heavy with disbelief. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, his chest tightening as the weight of what just happened sank in. His classmates exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether they'd heard correctly. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others stared at Evelyn in stunned silence. Even Evelyn herself looked shocked, her hand flying to her mouth as if to take back the word that had already escaped. I didn't mean. Evelyn stammered, her voice trembling. She glanced around the room, searching for some way to undo the damage. But it was too late. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud, casting a shadow over everyone present. Without another word, Evelyn dismissed the class early, waving her hands dismissively as if she could shoo away the tension along with the students. Chairs scraped against the floor as kids quickly gathered their things, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere. Marcus lingered for a moment, his jaw clenched, and his fists balled tightly at his sides. Then, without looking back, he grabbed his bag and walked out, his heart pounding with anger and humiliation. As the last student left, Evelyn slumped into her chair, her head in her hands. What had she done? She replayed the moment in her mind, cringing at the memory of the hateful words slipping past her lips. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She prided herself on being professional, on keeping her emotions in check. Yet here she was, undone by her own prejudice. Outside the classroom, whispers erupted in the hallway. Students who hadn't been there pieced together fragments of the story from those who had witnessed it firsthand. By the time Marcus reached his locker, the incident was already spreading like wildfire. Friends approached him cautiously, asking if he was okay. Some offered support, while others simply stared, unsure of what to say. Word traveled fast in a small school, and it wouldn't be long before everyone knew. Back in the empty classroom, Evelyn sat alone, staring blankly at the clock on the wall. She couldn't shake the image of Marcus's face, the hurt and disbelief etched into his expression. For the first time in years, she felt truly ashamed. But shame wouldn't fix what she'd broken. And as the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Evelyn realized this was only the beginning of the fallout. Whatever happened next would change all of their lives forever. In a quiet suburban town, where life moved at a predictable pace, there was a high school that seemed like any other. The hallways buzzed with laughter, the cafeteria smelled of pizza and fries, and students hurried to their next classes. Among them was Marcus Johnson, a 16-year-old with big dreams and an even bigger heart. He loved learning, especially history, because it helped him understand the world better. His teachers often praised his sharp mind and willingness to speak up in class, but not everyone appreciated his voice. Mrs. Evelyn Harper had been teaching for over 20 years. To most, she appeared strict but fair, a no-nonsense educator who pushed her students to succeed. However, beneath her polished exterior lay hidden biases she rarely acknowledged, even to herself. Evelyn believed she treated all her students equally, but deep down, certain prejudices colored her views. She masked these feelings well, never letting them slip into her professional demeanor, until one fateful day. It started as an ordinary afternoon in Evelyn's history class. The topic was civil rights, a subject Marcus found fascinating. As they discussed landmark events and pivotal figures, Marcus raised his hand enthusiastically. When called upon, he shared his thoughts about how systemic inequality still lingered today. His words were passionate, backed by facts and examples. Some students nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. Evelyn listened silently, her lips pressed into a thin line. At first, she tried to steer the conversation back to her lesson plan, but Marcus wasn't done. He challenged something Evelyn had said earlier, that progress always came through peaceful means. What about when people are pushed so far they have no choice but to fight back? He asked boldly. Evelyn bristled at being questioned, particularly in front of her class. Her patience began to wear thin. The room grew tense as Evelyn countered Marcus's points, her tone sharpening with each exchange. Other students watched nervously, sensing the shift in energy. Marcus didn't back down. Instead, he stood firm, his confidence unwavering. For Evelyn, this felt like insubordination rather than intellectual debate. Her frustration mounted until, finally, she snapped. What happened next changed everything, not just for Marcus and Evelyn, but for the entire school. It was a moment that would ripple outward, exposing truths long buried and forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable realities. Little did Evelyn know, her actions would lead to consequences far beyond anything she could imagine. And for Marcus, it would become a defining chapter in his young life, testing his strength and resilience in ways he never expected. As the clock ticked closer to the end of the period, none of them realized how quickly their lives were about to change. The calm before the storm was nearly over, and when the storm hit, it would leave no one untouched.